I jerked awake to the sound of my name being screamed like a weapon. Before I could even sit up straight, my manager Mark grabbed the bowl of soup I had been saving for my late lunch and dumped it directly into my lap. The scorching heat ripped a scream from my throat as the liquid soaked through my jeans and burned my skin. My coworkers stood frozen in the doorway, eyes wide with shock, but nobody moved to help me. Mark sneered down at me, his face twisted with rage. He called me lazy and worthless, saying if I had time to sleep on the job, I had time to be unemployed. My legs trembled as I struggled to stand, the burning sensation spreading across my thighs. I could feel everyone's eyes on me as I stumbled toward the bathroom, fighting back tears. The last thing I heard was Mark barking orders at everyone to get back to work. As I pushed through the bathroom door, I whispered to myself through clenched teeth, "He's not getting away with this." My hands shook as I locked the stall door behind me. The pain was unbearable, radiating through my legs with each step, but the humiliation cut even deeper than the burns. Inside the bathroom stall, I carefully peeled my jeans away from my skin, biting my lip hard to keep from crying out. Angry red patches covered my thighs, already starting to blister in some spots. My hands trembled as I pulled out my phone and took shaky photos of the burns from every angle. I replayed the moment in my head over and over. Mark's hateful expression, the shocked faces of my coworkers, the way nobody stepped in to stop him. The humiliation was almost worse than the physical pain. A soft knock on the stall door made me freeze. "Mia? It's Rosa," a gentle voice called. I watched as she slid burn cream and a spare apron under the door. "You didn't deserve that," she whispered before her footsteps faded away. I stared at the photos on my phone, evidence of what he had done to me. Part of me wanted to march straight to HR and report everything. But another part of me, the part that needed this job to pay rent, wondered if speaking up would just get me fired. I clutched my employee badge, feeling it dig into my palm. My tears finally came, hot and silent, mixing with the throbbing pain that refused to fade. 20 minutes later, I sat in the cramped HR office, my jeans still sticking uncomfortably to my burned legs. Denise from HR frowned sympathetically as I showed her the photos and explained what happened. Her words sounded rehearsed and hollow. "We take these allegations very seriously, Mia," she said, but her eyes wouldn't meet mine. She asked if I might have misinterpreted the incident, suggesting that Mark was under a lot of pressure and had a lot on his plate. My stomach dropped. When I asked about security footage from the break room, she promised to check with the system, but she didn't write anything down in her notebook. She didn't even pick up her pen. Instead, she gave me another sympathetic smile and said she would handle it internally. "These things take time to investigate properly," she added, standing up to signal our meeting was over. I walked out of her office knowing deep in my gut that absolutely nothing would happen. Mark had been with the company for 8 years. I had been there for barely 2. The power dynamic was crystal clear. I felt dismissed and invisible, like my pain meant nothing compared to protecting their longtime manager. Back on the restaurant floor, the atmosphere felt heavier than before. Mark walked past me like nothing had happened, barking orders at the line cooks and checking tickets. I noticed Jamal, one of the servers, deliberately avoiding eye contact with me. Later, when I was restocking napkins near the walk-in fridge, he nervously approached me. He glanced around to make sure nobody was watching, then pulled out his phone. "I didn't know what to do," he said quietly, but I started recording. On his screen was a shaky video that showed everything. Me sleeping at the break room table, clearly exhausted, Mark storming in and shouting. Then the soup cascading into my lap while someone gasped in the background. My heart pounded as I watched the proof of what he had done to me. This video could change everything. "Can you send this to me?" I whispered urgently. "And please don't delete it. Don't tell anyone you have it." Jamal nodded and quickly airdropped the file to my phone before hurrying away. I felt the weight of that video in my pocket like a secret weapon. Finally, I had undeniable proof that this wasn't an accident or a misunderstanding. 2 days later, the new schedule was posted on the office door. My name had been moved to all the worst shifts, back-to-back closing shifts, split shifts that made it impossible to have a life, and a sudden demotion from shift lead back to regular server. My total hours stayed technically the same, but every single slot was now the least desirable time to work. When I confronted Mark about it, he smirked and shrugged. "You want a nap on company time, you lose privileges," he said loud enough for others to hear. I went to Denise in HR, but she claimed it was just operational needs, nothing personal. I felt the walls closing in around me as regular customers asked why I wasn't in charge of my section anymore. During my break, I sat in my car in the parking lot, hands shaking with anger and frustration. I opened my phone and created a new folder, labeling it Evidence. I dropped in the photos of my burns, the video from Jamal, and screenshots of my old schedule compared to the new one. This was just the beginning. The retaliation was obvious and deliberate, but I wasn't going to let them break me without fighting back. Alone in my car, I scrolled through everything on my phone and organized it carefully into the evidence folder. I added screenshots of text messages from Rosa, confirming she had witnessed the whole incident. I started a new note titled Incidents and began logging every detail I could remember: dates, times, and cruel comments Mark had made to me and other employees over the past months. As I typed, memories flooded back of moments I had brushed off as just him having a bad day. The time he cornered the dishwasher and threatened to have him deported. The time he grabbed a server's wrist so hard it left a bruise. The time he screamed at a line cook until the guy quit right in the middle of dinner rush. The pieces started clicking together in my mind like a horrible puzzle. If Mark had done this to me so casually in front of witnesses, what else had he gotten away with behind closed doors? How many other people had he hurt? I saved my notes and leaned back in my seat, staring at the restaurant through my windshield. This was bigger than just me. This was about stopping him from hurting anyone else ever again. The next afternoon was slow, and a DoorDash driver came in to pick up an order. He paused when he saw me behind the counter and tilted his head. "You still work here?" he asked, surprised. "I thought you would have quit like all the others." My stomach twisted. He mentioned a former server named Danny who had left in tears a few months ago, saying Mark was going to ruin someone's life one day. After my shift ended, I searched for Danny on social media and found her profile. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I typed out a message. "Hey, it's Mia from North Point Grill. I know this is random, but did you ever file a complaint about Mark?" I stared at the message for a long moment, my thumb hovering over the send button. Sending this message would open a door I couldn't close. It would mean admitting this was bigger than I thought. It would mean potentially dragging other people back into something painful. But I pressed send anyway. Within an hour, 3 dots appeared showing she was typing back. My heart raced as I waited. Knowing her response could change everything about how I fought this battle. Danny's reply came through as a wall of text that made my blood run cold. She told me Mark had screamed at her until she had a full panic attack in the walk-in freezer, then mocked her afterward for being too sensitive and emotional. She had reported it to HR, and they promised to coach him on his behavior. Instead, her hours mysteriously dried up over the next 2 weeks until she had no choice but to quit. She couldn't mentally survive staying in that environment. Then she did something I didn't expect. She connected me with 2 other former employees who had similar stories. One had been bullied until she developed anxiety attacks. Another had been threatened when he asked for time off for his daughter's surgery. As I read through their messages, my shock slowly transformed into cold, focused anger. This wasn't just bad luck or Mark having a bad day. This was a clear pattern of abuse that management knew about and chose to ignore. I created a shared cloud folder and labeled it North Point Stories, then invited all of them to upload anything they had. Documents, texts, emails, anything. We were building something Mark couldn't ignore. Together, we were stronger than any of us had been alone. Armed with the video, my burn photos, and written testimonials from former employees, I drafted a detailed email to the corporate ethics inbox that was listed on a dusty poster in the breakroom. I attached every single piece of evidence and hit send, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Days crawled by with no response. When I finally received a reply, it was a generic template message thanking me for my concerns and assuring me they were reviewing the situation. Meanwhile, Mark continued walking around the restaurant, completely unfazed, cracking jokes with upper management like nothing had happened. He even got praised at the staff meeting for improving kitchen efficiency. A few days later, I was restocking plates when Mark appeared behind me at the point-of-sale screen. He leaned in close enough that I could smell his cologne and whispered, "You're making this worse for yourself, Mia." My blood went cold. How did he know I had spoken up? Who had told him? I realized then that corporate must have informed him about my complaint. They had put a target on my back. I felt exposed and vulnerable, wondering what he would do next to punish me for daring to speak up. Over the next week, I noticed people treating me differently. A busser who used to joke around with me suddenly started avoiding my section. The host wouldn't make eye contact when assigning tables. During a quiet moment, Rosa pulled me aside and admitted she had overheard Mark telling another manager that I was unstable and trying to extort the company for money. Rumors were spreading through the staff that I had faked the burns or exaggerated what happened to get a payout. I felt sick. Mark was systematically destroying my reputation, turning me into the problem instead of him. Some people were actually buying into his narrative. Later that day, I overheard him laughing loudly with the assistant manager near the kitchen, saying just loud enough for me to hear, "Some people just can't handle a real job." I walked away before anyone could see the tears forming in my eyes. I locked myself in the bathroom stall and pressed my forehead against the cold metal door. He was winning. He was making me look like a liar, and I didn't know how to fight back against it. The isolation felt worse than the burns had, eating away at my confidence and making me question everything. One shift, I was called into the back office unexpectedly. Denise handed me a formal write-up for insubordination and leaving the floor without permission. My hands shook as I read the paper. They claimed I had abandoned my section without telling anyone, even though I had specifically informed the shift lead I was running to the bathroom. Denise said multiple witnesses had confirmed the story, but she wouldn't tell me who these witnesses were. My mind raced. This was a setup. They were building a paper trail to fire me with so I couldn't fight back or collect unemployment. I refused to sign the document and grabbed the pen to write my own account in the employee comment section. My handwriting was messy because my hands were shaking, but I made sure to write clearly, "I believe this is retaliation for reporting workplace abuse." I slid the paper back across the desk and locked eyes with Denise. She immediately looked away and shuffled some papers on her desk. "You can go back to work now," she said quietly. I walked out knowing they were closing in on me. The trap was set, and they were just waiting for any excuse to spring it and end my employment permanently. That night, I drove to an electronics store and bought a small audio recorder that was legal to use in my state for recording conversations I was part of. The next time I was called into the office, I discreetly turned it on before stepping inside. Mark and Denise were both waiting for me, sitting side by side like a unified front. They began rewriting history right in front of me. Mark claimed the soup incident was accidental spillage, that his hand had slipped. Denise added that I had overreacted to a minor accident. They said Jamal's video was taken out of context and didn't show the full picture. They insisted my burns were minor and had healed quickly, suggesting I was being dramatic. My pulse pounded in my ears as I calmly asked, "So dumping hot soup on an employee is acceptable here?" Neither of them answered directly. Mark cleared his throat and changed the subject to my recent performance issues. I walked out of that office with the recorder still running in my pocket, and it captured Mark muttering to Denise, "She won't win this. She'll quit before it goes anywhere." I sat in my car afterward, replaying the recording 3 times, feeling both vindicated and disgusted by their casual dismissal of what they had done. Late that night, I lay in bed, staring at my ceiling, unable to sleep. My mind replayed every conversation, every threat, every humiliation. I grabbed my phone and searched for information about workplace harassment and retaliation laws. After reading for an hour, I found a number for a national labor rights hotline. On my next day off, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and dialed the number with shaking hands. A kind woman answered, and I told her everything from the beginning. The soup, the burns, the video, the write-up, the rumors, the recordings. All of it. She listened without interrupting, taking notes. When I finished, she told me I potentially had a strong case for workplace harassment and retaliation. She recommended documenting everything in even more detail and consulting with an employment attorney as soon as possible. She gave me the name of a local lawyer who specialized in these cases. I wrote down his name, circled it twice, and felt something shift inside me. Maybe I wasn't powerless after all. For the first time in weeks, I felt like someone actually believed me and understood that what happened wasn't acceptable or normal workplace behavior. A week later, I sat in a quiet office downtown across from Mr. Kaplan, the employment attorney recommended by the hotline. I laid everything out on his desk. My phone with the photos and video, printed screenshots, my timeline of events, audio recordings, testimonials from former employees. His eyes widened as he reviewed each piece of evidence. He explained legal terms and concepts in plain English I could actually understand, talking about hostile work environments and retaliatory actions. He suggested filing formal complaints with the State Labor Board and sending a new notification to corporate legal, not HR. This time, they would know I had legal representation. My chest felt tight, but not entirely from fear anymore. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a flicker of actual power. If they think you're alone and scared, they'll steamroll you, Mr. Kaplan said, looking me directly in the eyes. Let's show them you're not alone. I nodded, sitting up straighter in my chair. I was done being intimidated. It was time to fight back properly. With Mr. Kaplan's help, I filed a formal complaint with the State Labor Board and sent a new, detailed letter directly to corporate legal, rather than the useless HR department. We included specific dates, witness names, copies of text messages, still frames from the video, and a complete timeline of every retaliatory action taken against me. Once the complaint was officially submitted, everything shifted overnight. Corporate sent a curt email saying they had opened a formal internal investigation and asking me not to discuss the matter with coworkers. The tone was completely different from the dismissive response I had gotten from HR. Mark's entire demeanor changed too. He started acting stiff and overly polite around me, clearly having been warned by someone higher up. He stopped making snide comments and actually said please and thank you. The atmosphere in the restaurant felt like everyone was holding their breath, waiting for something to explode. Coworkers whispered in corners and went silent when managers walked by. I clocked in for my shift and felt the tension crackling in the air like electricity before a storm. I needed an outlet for everything I was feeling, so I created an anonymous account on a workplace forum. I posted a detailed story about a manager who dumped hot soup on an employee for napping, then got protected by HR. I changed enough details that the company wasn't identifiable. No names, no locations, just the raw story. I hit post and went to bed. The next morning, my phone was flooded with notifications. The post had blown up overnight with thousands of comments. People shared their own horror stories about abusive managers and corrupt HR departments. Dozens of people urged me to fight back and not let them win. Then I received a private message from someone claiming to be a journalist. They said they were investigating workplace abuse in the service industry and asked if I would be willing to share more information off the record. I stared at the message, my heart racing. My story was no longer just mine anymore. It was spreading beyond the four walls of North Point Grill. People were paying attention. I took a screenshot and sent it to Mr. Kaplan. 17 within days, corporate went into full panic mode. They sent a carefully worded email to all restaurant staff about being committed to a safe and respectful workplace environment. They announced an independent review would be conducted by a third-party investigator. Anonymous surveys appeared in everyone's employee portal. A woman in a business suit showed up at the restaurant with a clipboard and a neutral expression, introducing herself as the investigator. Mark looked genuinely rattled for the first time since this began. I watched him snap at staff out of stress, then immediately soften his tone when he noticed the investigator watching him. Coworkers started quietly approaching me in hallways and during smoke breaks, whispering that if the investigator talked to them, they would tell the truth about what Mark had done. Rosa squeezed my hand and said, "We've got your back." The investigator asked if I would be willing to provide all my evidence directly to her instead of going through HR. I scheduled a meeting for the following Tuesday and felt hope blooming in my chest for the first time in weeks. Several weeks later, I was called into a video conference with corporate representatives. They thanked me for bringing the matter to their attention and said they had taken appropriate internal action, though they couldn't disclose specific details due to privacy policies. They offered to restore my shift lead title and adjust my schedule back to more favorable hours. Everything sounded positive until I asked the question that mattered most. Is Mark still employed here? The corporate representatives exchanged glances on the screen and gave vague non-answers about personnel decisions being confidential. My stomach sank. They were trying to make this go away with small concessions while protecting Mark. I walked out of that meeting feeling like a child who had been patted on the head and given a cookie to stop crying. Later that evening, as I was leaving work, I saw Mark in the parking lot laughing with another manager. When he noticed me watching, he gave me a smug little wave. He was still there. Nothing had really changed. They thought I would just accept their token gestures and move on. That night, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It was Luis, a former line cook who had left North Point 6 months ago. He said he had seen my anonymous post on the forum and pieced together that it was about our restaurant. He had something I needed to see. We met at a coffee shop the next afternoon, sitting in a corner booth away from other customers. Luis showed me an old email he had sent to HR about Mark throwing a metal pan that narrowly missed his head while screaming slurs at him. HR had never acted on the complaint. Even worse, he had managed to photograph a confidential incident report before he quit, and someone had clearly altered the wording to minimize what had actually happened. The original handwritten notes mentioned the pan throwing, but the typed final report only mentioned a verbal disagreement. I felt sick looking at the evidence of their cover-up. I immediately forwarded everything to Mr. Kaplan with shaking hands. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was systemic. This was a pattern of protecting abusers and silencing victims. The company had done this before. Mr. Kaplan suggested we explore the possibility of a group claim against the company. I reached out to Danny, Luis, and the 2 other former employees who had shared their stories with me. All of them agreed to provide official written statements. We compiled everything into a massive shared document, organized by dates, types of incidents, injuries, threats, and HR failures. My anonymous post was still gaining traction online, and more people from other locations of the same restaurant chain started commenting with eerily similar stories. Different managers, different cities, but the exact same HR template responses that did nothing. Different victims, same pattern of protection for abusers. We had stumbled onto something much bigger than one bad manager at one location. Mr. Kaplan scheduled a meeting for the following week and told me to prepare myself. They don't see you as one person anymore, he said seriously. They see you as a potential public relations disaster. And that gives us leverage. I nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility for everyone else who had been hurt by this system. The journalist who had messaged me weeks ago followed up with more questions. They said they had been investigating the restaurant chain's workplace culture for months and now had multiple sources willing to talk. They asked if I would speak on background with my identity protected, but details verified through documentation. After a long discussion with Mr. Kaplan, we agreed to share certain pieces of evidence without publicly naming the company yet. Several weeks passed. Then one morning, I woke up to a text from Rosa with a link. A major local news website had published an investigation titled "A Culture of Abuse Behind a Popular Restaurant Chain." The article detailed multiple stories from different locations, including mine, though my name wasn't used. It discussed the pattern of HR dismissing complaints and protecting managers. Within hours, the article was being shared across social media. That afternoon at work, I saw customers scrolling on their phones and whispering to each other. Corporate sent an urgent email to all staff, instructing us not to speak to media under any circumstances. The panic in their message was obvious. The story was out, and they couldn't control it anymore. The next morning, district managers swarmed our location like angry bees. Mark was called into the back office and disappeared for over an hour. The tension in the restaurant was unbearable, as we all pretended to work while straining to hear anything from the office. When the door finally opened, Mark emerged with a pale face, carrying a small cardboard box with his personal items. There was no farewell speech, no handshake with the staff, nothing. A security escort appeared and walked him out through the back door. Staff members peeked around corners and exchanged stunned looks. My hands trembled, not from fear this time, but from an overwhelming rush of vindication. As he passed by me near the kitchen entrance, he opened his mouth like he wanted to say something. His eyes met mine for just a second. Then he snapped his mouth shut, looked down at the floor, and walked away. I watched him disappear through the back door and let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for months. It was finally over. He was gone. 2 weeks later, I received an invitation to meet with corporate's legal team at their main office. They praised my courage in coming forward and insisted Mark's termination was due to serious policy violations. Then they slid a stack of papers across the polished conference table. It was a settlement offer with a check amount that made my eyes widen. But there was a catch. I would have to sign a strict non-disclosure agreement and waive any right to pursue further legal action against the company. They framed it as helping everyone move on and putting this unfortunate situation behind us. I flipped slowly through the pages, feeling both tempted by the money and insulted by what they were asking. This was hush money. They wanted to pay me to disappear and forget everything that had happened. I closed the folder and looked up at the 3 lawyers sitting across from me. "I'll have my attorney review this," I said calmly. "But if you think this ends with one person fired and me paid to shut up, you don't understand me at all." Their professional smiles faltered slightly as I stood up and walked out. Over the next month, Mr. Kaplan and I had several long discussions with the other former employees who had come forward. Together, we negotiated for a better settlement agreement. We pushed for more than just money. We demanded real, concrete changes to company policies. The final agreement included mandatory third-party reporting channels that bypassed local HR, stronger protections against retaliation, and an independent audit of HR practices across all locations. I agreed to limited confidentiality about my specific settlement amount, but I refused any clause that prevented me from advocating for workers' rights in general. I also quietly decided to set aside part of my settlement money to start a small organization offering resources and legal referrals to service industry workers dealing with abuse. When I signed the final agreement, I didn't feel like I had been bought off. I felt like I had carved something meaningful and useful out of their guilt and fear. This wasn't just about me getting justice anymore. It was about changing the system so fewer people would suffer the way I had. That felt like a real victory. 6 months later, I walked into North Point Grill for the first time since quitting, not wearing my uniform, but as a regular customer with friends. The place felt different somehow. New posters about safe reporting hung in the hallways. The manager on duty actually smiled at staff and said please and thank you. There were subtle but real changes in the atmosphere. After we finished eating, I excused myself and slipped into the break room for just a moment. Same chipped table where Mark had found me sleeping, same humming soda machine in the corner. I sat down in the exact chair where I had been humiliated and burned, stretched out my legs that had long since healed, and let the quiet wash over me. My phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from a barista at a coffee shop across town, asking my new organization for help dealing with her toxic boss. I smiled and typed a quick reply, promising to call her tomorrow. Standing up, I took one last look around the break room, remembering everything that had happened here. Mark had poured soup on me to put me in my place, to humiliate me into silence. Instead, he had pushed me into finding my purpose. I walked out with my head held high,